Carter here. We got BBT Nick over here. We're finishing up this rig here. We got most of it completed. We want to take you guys through what it took to get some of these cards going. Working with AMD, you have to usually go through a couple different BIOSes for even the same card sometimes to get everything to work functionally. We want to take you guys through that process. All right, guys, let's get into this. I'm going to try to keep this one pretty brief, probably 30 minutes or so. And then we'll get in. I'll do question and answer as we go through it. I'm going to keep the chat up, and we're going to switch to the computer here because I'm going to bring up a few things that were covered over the last few days from an aspect of talking to community developers, protocol developers for the Ethereum network, along with just some of the conversations that have been going on in regards to who's really champion for this EIP moving forward, along with what does a champion mean for the EIP in the context that even if this is a compromise or comes through as a compromise with the Ethereum ecosystem as a potential opportunity to have in the kind of the back pocket, as it were. There still needs to be work done. Even if that's the case, even if it doesn't move forward with a planned hard fork for Prog proof of work, what does it entail to make sure that it is still, enterprise class, given the responsibility that, everybody has on their shoulders when it comes to an ecosystem such as this. So it's not as willy-nilly as most normal crypto networks that don't have a lot of liquidity, because a lot of people have a lot of real money wrapped up into this. So decisions have to be made, with the context of understanding that, hey, people are making investments in this, and this just isn't a few group of people making a decision. I want to talk to both sides of that, but I also want to make sure that the core algorithm uphold of the network is still being secured by what I believe, and I've believed for the entire time I've been mining, from the better distribution, the better, saturation you have of that mining hash power makes you have the ability to react faster. Having access to equipment in the space matters a lot, especially if you are being attacked, that you can have a monstrous amount of people come in and help, react to that. Where in situations where you have like ASICs or FPGAs, at the end of the day, even if you needed to force project a lot of hash power, you couldn't, just because you're only going to have a few entities that have the real size and scope to that. So I'm going to talk to both sides. I'm going to explain kind of where I think it is, where proof of work right now sits right now, in the proverbial question of, is it going to go, is it not going to go, that kind of thing. So I'm just going to get into it. A lot of people can come back and rewatch this. I encourage people to share it. As I start to kind of go through kind of where things are at, we'll talk specifically first around some of those conversations I had, and then kind of make sure that there's some context to both sides, and then I'll talk through what the compromise is and how that would be right now based on the proposal, where it would be at, and then it gives you guys kind of somewhere to look at of where to go to see where the current state and status of that is going to be. I'm going to cover a couple of the risk still on the network, because I think there's some confusion where people think it's just ASICs that it's trying to, obfuscate with regards to the ossification of ASICs and FPGAs. What's the other risk? Like if a few ASICs are going to drop off, why fork the currency if these ASICs are going to become inoperable? I'm going to kind of focus on a letter that shows some of the attack vectors on ethash and why that's a huge risk. And then I'll get into where I think, some of the shelling points, and I'll explain what that is to people, if we were to enable proof of work in a disabled state in one of the next forks, what would be the trigger to turn that back on? What would be the kind of, real guidance that would then give everybody kind of like, oh yeah, we probably need to activate this, that comfort level. And I think I'm going to take it from a miner perspective and see if it makes sense for folks with the way it makes sense for me. You can ask the questions. I'll try to answer them as I get through a couple of the points. I see somebody just asked right now, but we have ASICs on this network. Yes, there are. There are two known ASICs right now on the network, the E3, which should be dropping off in April. If it stays in line with what's going on with ETC, where ETC is running a bit ahead of Ethereum for all kinds of reasons. One, it didn't roll back, right? That's the whole point of ETC with the DAO fork. When Ethereum DAO forked off, it rolled the chain back. It went back to a previous block number. You're automatically going to have that natural head start for ETC. And then there's times where ETC, just from the way blockchains can grow apart from each other, from just the probability of solving blocks, and while there's an estimated block time, it's all mathematically driven. Sometimes the average block time will stay really close to the same, but sometimes you have some variance. And then you've also had ETC forking off, or one of their hard forks getting rid of the Ice Age events, which has happened a couple more times in Ethereum. Ethereum just keeps postponing it. So there's a natural separation between ETC and Ethereum when it comes to block height, which block height also is predicated on what epoch, or it's the epoch level, which then sets the DAG size. That's why ETC is a little ahead on the amount of how big the DAG is. Why we'll start to see, I think it's actually a good thing, because it's kind of it gives you kind of a forward-looking view into what could happen with Ethereum. As long as they don't change some of the core underlying features, you're going to have that kind of foresight with ETC. So we're seeing that foresight right now with the E3 falling off ETC. The estimations around April 9th for the E3 to fall off Ethereum's network. The A10, it's still up for speculation. I've seen some talk that's confirmed that it has 4 gig. So I have not seen anybody come back and say their A10 does not work on ETC. That would be our first confirmation. Let's go ahead and get into some of this, and then again, if you've asked a question and I missed it, you can re-ask when I ask for questions, and I'll give it for the time delay. That way people can get some of their questions asked. I'm going to switch over to where you guys can see their, and yes, I did see a note on there that there could be ASICs that are taking advantage of the ethash vulnerability. I will talk about the ethash vulnerabilities. More specifically, it's most likely a bit stream for an FPGA taking advantage of that more than an ASIC, than somebody investing money into an ASIC. But we'll go into part of the risk of that we're proposing on the mining side, that they still need to include ProgPoW proof of work as at least a poison pill, because if the messaging is clear that the community is going to do nothing and keep ethash, then the financial incentive is there for somebody to take and fabricate hardware to take that risk and chance that POS is going to push out, the proof of stake is going to push out, and if they know that the hard fork isn't going to happen with an algorithm change, then the financial incentive is there for somebody to then try to exploit this onto something as tighter manufactured as an ASIC. Toward ASIC is a lot more simpler. It's complex to build, but once you build it, you can just keep pressing them, and it's just all about getting the foundries to pump out what you need. So then there's your part of your exponential risk. But we'll get into that specifically when I get into the vulnerability side. So no fears for the folks that are watching. I will cover that. Let's get to the computer, and I'll kind of go through the last few days of talking with the community in the most cordial manner I can, that what the other side was. People that were saying no to ProgPoW proof of work. Was it the wisdom of the crowd, people that just know somebody else and just says, they don't like it, so I don't like it. What was the real rationale? What were the true feelings that were putting people into that position? And I mean, there was an audit on ProgPoW proof of work, and what the output that I've seen from most people on here, and this will be kind of a generalization at first, is I don't think it's of a technical nature. I think it all comes back down to incentives and risk to network more than it is that they're concerned that ProgPoW won't function, will break something. So let's get that clear. I did not see any compelling arguments of what happened in 2018 where people were concerned that it was going to put one GPU ahead of another, and it was a technical risk. There might be something that's kind of hidden. There's probably still people like that out there that have that concern, because anything that is introduced, here, I'll come back to where I'm talking. If I'm going to talk, I'll come back to this. If something is introduced in such a manner that is kind of a cloak and dagger, where you're coming in, you're anonymous, you've said, hey, I built this cool thing, check it out, audit it, you're always going to have people that are going to be questioning it. I think Satoshi was brilliant by dipping in, dropping the white paper, and then dipping out and allowing the community and the ecosystem to really build up around the ethos of what Bitcoin is. However, if you continue to be part of the ecosystem and you're still staying cloaked and daggered, for whatever reasons, you're going to have this natural resistance, I think, for people to accept what you're trying to push. And I think that's part of the issue in general when it comes to the technical validity of ProgPoW proof of work. I will absolutely acknowledge that. If me looking in from outside looking into a situation, that would be my first kind of like, well, what's the things are too good to be true. Like everything we're taught is to make sure that they have something could be up with that. Now that could be you could spin it from a privacy standpoint and say, there's an entire ecosystem in crypto that is, and me personally, I think that people need to have that right to privacy, and you have an ability to do that. It's just, there's behaviors when you're introducing something that will lead people to not believe what's going on. So the fact that there was an audit on ProgPoW proof of work, it's been out there for 2 years. People could punch holes through it. They can adjust dials. You've had technical representation from not just the folks introducing it, but you've had other technical representation on Ethereum's dev team that are well respected, that have also reviewed it. And at the end of the day, there's like, you know, dude, it only does these few things. It takes advantage of the GPU in this particular way. To try to replicate or try to gain an advantage on that, you would essentially have to become a hardware manufacturer competing with AMD and NVIDIA. And that's kind of the point of it. So I think technically I'm going to put that off to the side with the acknowledgement that I think the way it was introduced put it in a situation, right? Helped fuel the conspiracy of the situation. I think the technical soundness of it's been there. People have been able to punch holes through it, and there's a confidence level to try to implement it to where it's been implemented in other currencies. And there's the push now twice for Ethereum that's obviously spun up this whole issue again. So we'll put a pin in the technical piece of it. The next pieces are a little more deep when it comes to assertions and game theory and what could happen and who we're displacing by doing such an action. And I think that's really where I was going with this particular kind of thread I'm working right now. And this exchange that I had with some of the, you know, one of the main core developers for part of the protocol has a few dApps and protocol level stuff right now. Matt, I mean, I might be saying his name wrong, Lingo, where he really was kind of trying to counter my assertion that, you know, a proof of work algorithm change on a crypto network is like changing socks these days, where it's not a hugely complex issue and it's not about the technical implementation. And that's where I was coming in from the angle. His counterpoint was that you know, like this isn't just about an SSL cert type of change out where you're just changing the consensus algorithm. There's financial impact to other parties. It's breaking, you know, an already established event that, you know, the E3s, the A10s are there. And, you know, I kind of went back and forth with Matt on this where under this particular one statement here where it was like you're advocating for dumping a whole bunch of people's capital investments in the garbage and risking the fractured community for a little demonstrable reason. Now, the part of the demonstrable reason I'm going to cover in this, but my response to him was the irony of that post answers everything for the past 7+ million GPUs and nearly every country in the world that's mined Ethereum since 2015. My point to that counter the argument is that when the ASICs were being introduced into this ecosystem and there was a call to arms to say, are we going to do something about this? Because essentially our white paper said, or our yellow paper said that we were going to be ASIC resistant. Now we have this ASIC threat. We know proof of stake is pushed out. Are we going to act or not? And the non-action enabled this event to continue. So to counter, I would say, that whole bunch of capital investments. The second that those things were communicated that, hey, we're going to do this, and the reactions that we're seeing, and then the non-action that occurred when it came to implementing anything, it wasn't even about prog proof of work at that time, enabled this event to occur. So from a GPU miner standpoint is that we've already been burned on that no action because we made capital investments, this community did, predicated on a statement that was put in a yellow paper. So now it's a credibility thing for me. From I'm taking that angle, it's a credibility thing to the ecosystem that said, this is what we're going to do. So as far as we're concerned, that yellow paper is, I guess, just, it's not being adhered to. Now, I'm going to give a slight pass to Ethereum because at the time, and I'll come in, I know your GPU miners are going to flip out, things were a little different than 2015 when they wrote it. The size of market caps, the amount of apps, the size that Ethereum grew, being essentially the second largest market cap coin in the world, is kind of tilted things. It's not as easy as black and white on that. It's not as easy as a single statement inside of a yellow paper, and I submit that for sure. And that things should be gone through, and it should involve a larger community of understanding. But it is one of those things that inaction created kind of this now event that we're in, and now the exposure of other risk to ethash has created, I would say, the second kind of acknowledgement of a phase that will occur, all predicated on POS becoming a thing or not in the near future. If POS does not become a near thing in the near future, and people have some level of confidence that they're not going to enact Prog proof of work or any other algorithm, then we can make the capital investment to take advantage of the known flaws in Ethereum ethash, and we will now corner, we being, any financial entity that wants to invest and try to get that faucet that comes out from the distribution of Ethereum every day, every 15 seconds, 2 ETH coming out, where they're like, it's $400 every 15 seconds, roughly. Yeah, that's a pretty good deal. We should totally build something for that because they're not going to do anything. So that's that kind of counterpoint. So that creates a few entities that will then try to corner it, and there's the financial incentive to not have a distributed model in that. It's kind of just the way the ecosystem works, and then the economies of scale will enable that activity to just a few, because there's only so many foundries and there's only so much hardware, and this stuff's expensive. Like, people are not going out and buying $200, $300 GPUs to compete. They're buying $3,000 to $5,000 to $7,000 pieces of equipment that also has trade restrictions on it. So this is part of the risk. This is part of the risk. This is part of the issue. So now I've kind of contexted that. So I'm respecting the fact that the network's larger, and that we need to take with caution and a behavior that mimics something of a responsibility of a $1 billion plus situation for a lot of different parties and people. But it comes down to the basic decision that is Ethereum going to allow to protect its network from getting into that event that I just talked to? And this compromise that we'll get into is the second part here. Let me get into this part here, which was proposed by Ben. I don't remember his last name. There's so many people I've talked to. So Ben, I'm just going to call you Ben right now, buddy. On a compromise. Now this compromise, I'll put the links below in the description once the video is done here, but this compromise is that there's an activation. I'll cut to the chase on this. Bottom line, I think there's a couple decision points here. One, would they include Prog proof of work in the next hard fork with it disabled, but with a trigger switch that could be activated if there was an issue, right? That's essentially what this is. The proposal is that it would be fully implemented and tested across all major clients. This is already done on testnet. So on all the major clients already have Prog. This step here is more of a checkpoint of just hitting the checkbox saying, hey, this is already there. I would agree that I think that it needs to be retested with 0.93, including some of the mining. And I'll get to where I'm kind of going with that, is helping to champion actions forward on this. Prog proof of work should not be included as any planned future hardware upgrade. All clients would include a command switch that enables Prog proof of work at a block height of the specific node operator. Bottom line, they're going to have a trigger switch to be able to trigger it on the node side. The enabled hard fork on the testnet would be created and maintained via the switch. And then this last point here I'm going to talk to on a strong shelling point should be encouraged by the community. Clear evidence that ASIC-led attack is out there. I'll be neutral on the attack language there. I think it comes down to, what do we consider an attack, or what do we consider fair market ability on the network? Meaning, like, if somebody has a tactical advantage of being able to put an ASIC in there because an ASIC was created, and then it supersedes the ability for others to participate, that would be the equivalent to a shelling point. Let's pause for a second to explain. I don't know if the community or most people know what a shelling point is, but I'll give you the quick and dirty of it. If me or one of you wanted to meet in some town somewhere, we'll use LA, New York, Chicago, it doesn't matter. and we didn't know any more than just the fact of a town that we're going to go to, we both have to decide where and when we would show up there. So what history shows is most people, when polled in a large thing, if let's say New York, most people will pick Grand Central Station at like noon, or they'll pick, you know, the Sears Tower at noon at a certain time. It's the ability to, in a large distributed consensus of people come into a solution, come up with a place and then the win. The only thing that doesn't really work with the shelling point is I think that's fine. We can agree in the context of mining, in the context of what we're talking about for the shelling point in this, I would see it as what type of event and what metric would we align to that, hey, this is a problem. And for me, one of the shelling points for that would be, well, if I can take, and I'll switch over to a notepad here, I think right here. Let's go to here and then here. Tell me if you guys can't see this. This is kind of, let me see if I can blow this up here. I don't know if you guys can see that very well. Let's do this and expand this up a little bit. 75. Here we go. Hopefully that works. So here, these are some bullet points I got for a prog proof of point checklist, and I'll go through those. But here's kind of the shelling point example right here that I'm talking about. So the trigger, I think you could publish based on a particular, whatever kind of an industry-leading example from that's available to everybody, which is like a GTX 1660. So a particular type of architecture, meaning a graphics card on the NVIDIA and AMD side. We could do the Navi too. The max efficiency of a 1660 Ti on Ethereum's network's around 30 mega hash at about 62 watts. It's 60, it depends on what you get. It could be 62 to close to 70 watts, depending on the tuning of it. But right now in the current network in value, the output of an 8x rig of that is about 575 watts of power. That's for 240 mega hash on Ethereum's network. That right now earns you $2.56 a day after power. Power cost on that on 575 watts at 6 cents per kilowatt. I'm also taking the OpEx. So I think you have the CapEx cost comparison where you have your hardware, which is your 1660 Ti rig, and then you have your OpEx, which is your operations expense. And mind you, when you're calculating OpEx for mining, for most people, especially when you're talking in-home mining, you do not take in effect of paying yourself some rate, right? It is purely what is the rig doing. The rig is the worker. It is not you as the worker and you're earning a salary. So you're calculating it against that. That would put at 6 cents per kilowatts about the best that you can get kind of as a citizen in, common, I mean, for me, it's around 6 cents. I know for a lot of other people, it's around 12 cents. And I know on the coastlines, it's around probably 18 to 20 cents per kilowatt. So you're pretty much non-profitable. But for us at 6 cents per kilowatt, this is still profitable. And we're talking about $76 a month for a single rig, for a 1660 Ti rig. Now, that's right now, that's current. So that's right now showing us that regardless of the ASICs and A10s and content that are out there, the network is still to where people can participate. Now, obviously, more people jump on, that price will go down, that profitability goes down due to the amount of Ethereum that you're going to be earning is going to be less because the size of pie is larger. The risk of, or the chance of winning a block is less. And the chance of getting your proportional share of the pool of that particular block that's won is less as more people get on too. The difference is I think the shelling point is wrapped up in this kind of equation here. So it's the part of the shelling point that's the issue is that we're talking a timeline. We have to choose a timeline because it can't be just, oh, today we're super unprofitable, so it's got to switch. Let's trigger it now. It's got to be over a period of time, and we're going to have to come to an agreement of what the period of time is. I would say no more than 2 to 3 weeks. Most OpExes work on a 30-day period, and I think if we pass an inflection point of a large gap in the best efficiency of a GPU versus something else that's on the network, you're going to see that, and it's going to be sustained. I'll take the example by showing you an example of where RVN sits right now. So Ravencoin Networks kind of did this. it hard forked, it switched, and for a little bit, GPUs were back in reigning, and then very quickly, FPGA bit streams came out, and now the most efficient, if I take that same 1660 Ti on there, it's about 20 mega hash at about 86 watts per card. Full system cost, wattage is about 775 watts. Right now, and this is like one of the most efficient, GPU rigs that you could build in that space for it. I mean, there are questionably some other better ones, but you're losing money. So bottom line, and that's at 6 cents per kilowatt. So bottom line, I think that you can create a trigger point based on the hardware that's existing right now over a period of time, that if even the best hardware that's out there over a period of time is still unprofitable, as long as the price stays pretty flat. If the Ethereum's price dips, there's a natural rolling wave. So there's a rolling wave up and a rolling wave down. So if the Ethereum's price is at 240 and then tomorrow it's at 190, mining will still be occurring and it's going to taper off. There's a rolling wave behind it, right? There's a wake in that concept. The same thing is that when there's huge speculative rises, there's a gap of where there's people mining it and they're getting a lot more Ethereum and it goes very profitable for people, right? And then there's a wave to catch that back up because there's a natural equilibrium that occurs in mining. I've been mining since 2011. I'm telling you, it's the way it works. You have a natural equilibrium, especially if there's price that stays constant or flat in a range. Operations will move up to that equilibrium. And it's been around 6 cents per kilowatt per hour, agnostic if you're using ASICs or GPUs, because power is power when it comes to if you're powering on a network that's ASIC only or not. So I think that you build that around that to where it's just blatantly obvious, like right now with Ravencoin, it does not make sense to use GPUs. And when you have this massive effect of people echoing that, hey, this is not, like, it's completely in the red, it's pretty obvious that you have a situation where unless somebody has free power. And even there's your maximum absolute equation, is if you take the maximum efficiency of a GPU and the best ideal situation at a zero OpEx cost, and you're still not making money on that, there's a pretty high chance that you have some infiltration of some kind of either specialized hardware or a known ASIC. But if both the A10 drop off and the E3 drop off in April, and we still have some level of profitability, that's where that kind of compromise point that I'm coming and acknowledging that right now I can continue to mine Ethereum with GPUs. It's not hugely profitable, but Ethereum's also $240, where at one point it was $1,500, right? So that's not anybody's. That's the state of the market. We all live within that. We all feel the pains of that. If you're a development team that have been seeded with Ethereum and have to sell it to pay your developers, or if you're a miner and you're incentivized to participate in a network, nobody owns the fact of the price. That's just the way it is. That's part of the risk that all of us take on it, right? But I think we have to establish what's that trigger point, because then we can very quickly see that you don't have a huge amount of distribution on readily available equipment. So it's really establishing the concept of readily available equipment as something I can go out and purchase pretty regularly. I cannot go out and buy an A10. I cannot go out and buy an E3 tomorrow because I can go to a store. And even if we got to a distribution model to where it was an Amazon-like purchase model to where 2-day delivery I could get an ASIC, if we could get to that level of supply chain, I don't think that this would even, I think GPUs would have had their day. And I think that's what it comes down to. The availability and the ability to participate. I've always been beating on that piece there. It's not that GPUs and ASICs are bad, it's literally a supply chain issue. And there's been a lot of bad behavior because of the incentive mechanisms. Not enough is understood in accepted with an understanding of the fact AMD and NVIDIA over the entire period, there was a period in time where I would say AMD was kind of leaning in, and trying to understand mining a little more, because it definitely was affecting their sales. But short of the mining edition cards that was really procured through kind of a third-party mechanism to where people could just buy chips and slap them on boards and then sell them in an after OEM design, so you have a original manufacturer then sending it to a third-party, somebody that could just buy a blank model of like an Asus look and then put their name on it. And you have like P106, NVIDIA cards, mining edition cards. You did have that kind of micro industry blow up because of it. But having the core companies disassociated from giving a crap about the cryptocurrency mining thing is one of the best advantages of it, because you have this not deep conspiracy BS around it, where their core customer remains gaming, their core customer remains general compute, their core customer remains machine learning and artificial intelligence applications. Nobody wants to touch the cryptocurrency piece of it, right? They haven't really leaned into that. And I think that still plays an advantage of having the availability to where, anybody can go out there. Again, I've covered that kind of piece there. You guys can go back and hear the shelling points that I'm talking about on that piece. Part of that hedge and risk, I think discussion needs to be a little more blown out. And I can answer that as part of that thread when we start talking about what the benefits of keeping it decentralized and the ability for people to participate. I'll take that action to put that out there as part of the champion of this, of becoming the champion. So if people haven't known that I'm going to take that reign of communication and some of the actions. Some of the top pieces that I'm looking at right now for carrying this through to some level of a conclusion is the technical merits and next steps given a compromise. So moving forward, if the Ethereum community, myself champion it, can come to a compromise of understanding the technical merits of why you would want to do it, because that was part of the argument in general from the community, is why would we be doing this? Why are we wasting our time? We should focus on ETH 2.0. I am totally fine with you guys focusing on ETH 2.0. That's why you guys have two separate teams on ETH 2.0. We are talking about Ethereum 1 and the fact that you guys more than likely will exhibit a pairing of a hybrid network where you'll have proof of work and a proof of stake cycle within that we could look at a 2 to 3 year timeline on that. Given those steps and given what I just previously talked about, this is still a very technical key decision, I think, that needs to be made with regards to moving to a different algorithm. Having it as a compromise where it could be a triggered event, I personally am okay with. But I think that people need to have an understanding of what the real trigger point is. My kind of actions right now, current actions, is working with a few of the technical folks that are still accessible on Prog Proof of Work, along with the existing community, to validate the existing testnet instances. I've already started this action to find out which is 0.9.3 out there, where is it, who's hosting it, and get all of that information published for my fellow crypto channels. Can also help publish it and get that messaging out there, so if people want to start pointing a rig to a testnet to validate their miners, they can. This ensures that pools and solo mining activity for those testnets are clear and concise. Getting that in one place where people know that it's there, or multiple places. I just don't want it on one website, like having it on our website. It should be to where all people can get to it from a couple different websites and straight from the source, such as GitHub. These 2 points I'm working on right now. Compile miners for both AMD, CUDA, and OpenCL. Right now, the CUDA instances, most of the stuff is working fine on Linux. There is issues right now, known issues with AMD on Navi. Reaching out to AMD directly with the contacts I have at AMD, just from the years of mining and reaching out to people, asking where things are at, drivers are at, blockchain drivers, that sort of thing. Reaching out to them to see what the status of Navi drivers are for this particular issues that they're having. And then including to make sure that the instances for NVIDIA have the CUDA toolkit development dependencies built into it, because right now you have to install a 2.6 gig CUDA SDK for it to be able to leverage the dependencies, that's a no-go in me for me, boss. Like that, we got to have that packaged. So work in that piece, and then make sure all major kernels for AMD through the Hawaii chipset, which we're talking R9 290s, 390s, RX 470s, 480s, 580s, 590s, all have their correct kernels to where the miner will work for those. Confirm implementation methodology centered around the DAG and epoch and reference ID. That in specific, I'll switch back to where I can talk to you for that for a second. What that means is the trigger when we go live can be predicated, right now it's predicated on the block height, which then links to an epoch, which then builds the DAG file. The current DAG file is almost 4 gig. We know 4 gig cards are going to fall off around December timeline right now. If there's a possibility to where we can create a ranged reference to whatever block ID we start at when it goes to go live, of having a readjustment or a recalculation step that retargets, that can keep the epoch the same, but the DAG file is like divided by 10 to where we're taking it down a notch to where when we go live at whatever block number, it will still be based on block height, it will still be based on what epoch level it is, but can we adjust where the DAG file size decreases? Can we get it below 2 gig? It's a possibility. I've talked about it in the previous piece there to see technically if that makes sense. It would then offer an entire level of other GPUs. It does kind of, I do want to just put out there, it does kind of counter a point of what the whole point of the DAG was originally designed for, is to naturally wean off older implementations of GPUs. That was kind of a design decision, and it would kind of go in the face of that design decision, so it's not completely like a go. It's just something that I will explore because I know there's a whole bunch of people that knows the effects of what occurs when 4 gig cards fall off. 3 gig card was a pretty big hit for a lot of people. I have a rig right here which has 5 of these are 1060s that are 3 gig, and the other couple are 6 gig cards. So you know this has to mine something completely different because both ETC and Ethereum it cannot mine on the 3 gig card. So that is something I'm checking in. That's part of an implementation plan though. And if that implementation plan would then be on testnet, we'd be able to test it and that sort of thing. So that's part of it too. A benchmark of all modern GPUs on 0.9.3. I did a lot of the testing a year ago on around 60 different GPUs. That testing's available online. All that stuff was done on live stream, so it wasn't subjective to like I was doing something kind of funky or something. You guys get to see that live. And that is all up there. That was on 0.92. We're on 0.93 right now with this ProgPoW implementation with some accepted configuration changes. So I'm going to look at, is that going to bump the number and we go to 0.94 and then that becomes the baseline? That needs to be established because I think there's like 0.93 with some other things. Well, in my world, from a development standpoint, that just bumped the version number on a minor mod. So that should be almost 0.94, and that everybody understands what the switches and dials are at that point in time. So that needs to be figured out, and then once that baseline is established, we can make sure the miners are updated, and then after that's done, trigger for the testing of all the RX series and stuff. I have around 66 different types of GPUs here that I can test live with you guys. I'll be doing that testing on Twitch, just because they're very long and drawn out. There's a lot of dead space, and you know people can dip in and dip out to see results. All of those results will then be posted on YouTube in short little micro videos. That way you can just kind of get down to the quick and dirty on it. Hey, it's a 2-minute video. Cool, 1660 Ti does this on it. The rest of the community is encouraged to help with some of that. I'll make sure that that's an open Google sheet that we can just approve the changes to, and people can add their own analysis to that. There's a huge, entire, vibrant community of GPU miners that also have channels, which are very valuable. We all learn from each other, and that's part of the other selling point that's never really talked about in the Ethereum ecosystem is the understanding that there's a huge amount of content creators that are around the GPU mining space, GPU, CPU, and limited ASICs and FPGAs for networks that have really leaned into those purely, but it's not as I wouldn't call it as glorified, but there's not a lot of configurations to them, and there's honestly not a lot to talk about it, to make videos and content around it, because they're usually really limited. I did ASIC reviews back in the day, back in 2013, 2014. I used to review a lot of the ASICs that were available then. Actually, I reviewed one of the very first ASICs that ever came out then. I had the Jalapeno from Butterfly Labs. I did videos. I mean, there wasn't a lot to it then, and the availability was the risk at that time. And we could see it pretty quickly. I mean, you waited forever, then it showed up. It was now unprofitable. It was a disaster. So there is a huge, vibrant community that talks to this, helps people out, that gives a lot of open and free information. Most of the content that I create, if you are a news agency or if you are a publisher for CoinDesk or any of that, most of the content that I produce is royalty free, meaning I will post that in a medium that you can leverage and use. You are welcome to. I'm not going to sit there and hit you with something that I'm going to charge you on. I look at this as kind of paying forward to the ecosystem, and it helps encourage other folks to be part of it, right? I know it seems counterintuitive to the whole entire concept of mining, but I believe this kind of mining isn't a two-factor thing. One, it gets people to exposure to the industry, which may start with a mining rig to understand on how cryptocurrency works. They can earn cryptocurrency with maybe already a sunk cost. A lot of people own GPUs. A lot of people have rigs that they use to play games with each other. And then, they can actually download something to start to earn a little bit of cryptocurrency to their own wallet on their computer, and then send and receive and start to understand the mechanics of that. That appreciation of how deep and empowering that is for this ecosystem is unheard of. When Ethereum and all the pricing and everything went way up in 2017, you couldn't find a GPU on this planet. There was so much participation. You had a forced projection of around 3 million GPUs to close to 12 million GPUs in a span of about 7 months, which is essentially the entire global supply. But that gave this massive, intricate distribution model to a lot of people to participate. Those people that, by and large, were disenfranchised when decisions aren't made to ensure that there's a level of consistency to something that was stated before, such as the white paper saying it would be ASIC resistant. Every once in a while, I'll shamelessly plug decisions. Don't take it personally, my Ethereum brethren. It's just facts. It's just facts. But we're moving ahead. I'm gonna push what I can with understanding, knowledge, community, the right points I think that we can land on to ensure that there's consistency. For the folks that are watching that have ASICs and FPGAs, that ecosystem, there are a lot of other cryptocurrencies that open and welcome it. ETC is actually moving to SHA-3. It is embracing an ASIC environment. There are other coins that are going to embrace that. Ethereum could lean into and go with an ASIC environment. I think with a roadmap that leads to the absolute, it's going to move to a proof of stake world, kind of semi-limits it. We can see what happened in the hybrid world when we talk Dash. There isn't a lot of development on the Dash architecture standpoint. There's been the D3, and there might be a couple more that I don't really track that you guys can inform me on. But the ecosystem and the amount of people that talk about Dash when it comes to upholding its network is few and far between. Like, a lot of people aren't just talking about how mining Dash. A lot of people don't talk about Coin anymore. A lot of people don't talk about a lot of these coins that stopped embracing the larger diverse ecosystem. And I think that's part and parcel with the ability to have a lot of people participate in it. So embracing this is, I think, a good thing. I think the implementation strategy with having it deactivate it until there's a real clear and present danger is the compromise. I think having it implemented and ready to trigger is where it's at, and I support that piece of it. But again, I think that doesn't stop that we don't get the test nets up, get it ready, get it sound, get everybody comfortable with the trigger of it, and then if and when that event occurs, we're ready for it. And the ecosystem's ready for it, and everybody has a clear and present understanding of that. I'm going to switch over now. I went for about 40 minutes on this, 40 some minutes. I'll answer some questions. Let me switch back to this. Hopefully, I kind of just went. I wasn't reading from my main script kind of thing. I wanted to stay on point on the last one. This one was me kind of just free flowing, so hopefully you didn't get lost. And going back to that, I did say I was going to switch over real quick, though, and switch to the other risk factor. This is the other risk factor here. And I think this, let me step back for a second. This isn't just about ASICs. It's about bit streams that can take advantage of an algorithm. The letter that I'll go through right here explains a couple different attack vectors on ethash specifically. Those particular attack vectors allow essentially, it's like if I have to go through a large Excel sheet, let's say 1,000,000 rows, I can reduce my activity to just 10,000 rows. And then I can submit work on behalf of that 10,000 and have a high probability for getting through. Instead of having to go through that entire list, I can get where I need to be in a much reduced list. What that does is false frontline the mega hash. What that does is saying, I don't need to go through X amount of mega hash. I have this theoretical output because I have a much smaller list to do. Because of the way the architecture is, there is a known exploit on this that can be then fabricated. Right now, no doubt a collective handful are probably using this in a very intricate way with an FPGA, using bit streams that have to model up and then start executing this attack. For all of us, they're just making a lot of money based on the output of the normal inflation rate that comes into Ethereum every day, and they're keeping their behavior to where it's not impacting the system. So it's literally just a calculation step that you can come in there and say, don't ever be more than X amount, and always keep your profitability for GPUs. So you could have this situation where you have 3 million GPUs on a network, and then have to where the network, when you look at the hash rate versus the price, you could have 7 million GPUs. But you only have 3 because the 4 million GPUs is literally a handful of people with some really clever tech. I think you cannot, it's very hard to not incentivize that. That behavior is incentivized to do that. But that's done because it's leveraging a flaw within a known flaw within the algorithm. Like, again, we're talking facts. We're not, so my hate wouldn't be to the FPGA guy. Dude, good job. You figured it out, and you're getting a financial output from it. Like, what can you say? They have the financial incentive to do that if they have the skill set and the hardware. The difference is when that leaks out to somebody else, and or no action is taken on the Ethereum side, the Ethereum community side, and that behavior is looked at like, you know what? Screw those other 3 million graphics cards. We can take that. That's margin. That's white powder that's on the table, right? And they can look at that and look at that calculation step that they're giving away because they're trying to be compliant with the rest of the network and not scare people. If there's no action on a proof of work change as a poison pill in Ethereum's network, this is the risk that Ethereum is going to have. Period. No question asked. This isn't conspiracy theory. This is game theory, right? This is the simple math of it. If Ethereum, the rationale that it's staying where it's at right now is because you cannot, as the aggressor on that side, create a clear and present danger issue. So you keep just under. Ethereum's profitable. Everybody should be fine. But again, it's a size of pie argument. If the network would support X amount of GPUs, CPU, GPU, whatever, if they go to random X, and you're leaving just this much left for the GPUs. And I see that from the amount of people that have gotten out of it, And I see that from just the exposure into the industry of like, there's a very limited few that still do it. Maybe somebody has a couple rigs turned on here and there bouncing around a network, right? The critical mass has left Ethereum. The critical mass has separated to some other stuff, and a lot of people have turned off their stuff. So but there's a huge amount of hash rate still out there. And so you still have that kind of situation. And we've seen dark situations when it comes to Monero when they forked off and everybody was estimating 30-40% and it ended up being almost 90% of the network. And we're like, oh wow, that was a lot worse than we thought it was. Damn, right? I had the pleasure of being on that a couple times right when it was happening. You guys got to watch me on Twitch when that was going on, when we watched the network just fall right off. I'm just saying, clear and present, known flaw, known bug. It's been published. I'll have it out there for everybody to review and look at. And from a developer aspect, in a development stack, there is a known exploit on the execution of the core mechanism that does the security, which doesn't compromise your security, but it compromises the incentive feature of what that security should be providing. So bottom line, there's a bug, and that needs to be either patched or we need to have that poison pill in the system to wean off any absolute exploitation of that network, a future piece of that. Doing a crawl, walk, run approach to this where you have ProgPoW implemented in all of the clients, it's all deployed, it's all triggered off, there's a shelling point out there to ensure behavior and consistency. You still kind of have this world of both worlds. Will somebody take a chance at making more ASICs, knowing that the still-in strategy is going more proof of stake? Will they, and knowing that if they build too many of these devices and it puts it over that shelling point, that trigger could then turn them off and then take the risk at fabricating that hardware? I think it keeps it limited to at least FPGAs and not more new ASICs. I could absolutely be wrong on that, and they go ahead and just press forward. I think it comes down to keeping the telemetry and the understanding of new ASICs that are coming out. And if other people have came out and said, hey, I'm more efficient and here's more ASICs, knowing, well, we're just going to flip this trigger if you do that. So again, which de-incentivizes and isn't taking out people's invested capital because we're stopping it before it gets created. So I'll put that as a thing. Let's go to some questions, and then I'll give you guys, I said I was going to answer questions on this, but I got kind of ranty there. Hopefully this has been semi-informative. Let me know if it's been informative. I hope you guys share some of this content. I've seen some of the folks on the chat. I see Seth and Red Panda Mining, both good content creators. All right, let's look at some questions here. I'll start working my way back up. For XMR back on random X, I don't know what your question was there, buddy. Why not miners vote about algorithm changes? The votes are, the problem with the votes is there's been votes. The miners voted. There's been carbon votes, there's been coin votes, and the problem with votes is the disproportionate size of certain people that have lots of ETH can sway the vote if it's weighted, if it's volume weighted based on ETH. If you have a wallet and you have 2,000 ETH in it and you sign that versus somebody that has 1 ETH and they've signed it, if it's volume weighted, it's going to put a lot of weight towards the people with more coin. You see the basic issue with proof of stake in that. And that's some of the still kind of issues, unless you created a medium where multiple people can stake. The levels of the staking is low enough. You can create a better behavior there. I'm against prog proof of work as an AMD guy. Gary, prog proof of work, if you look at some of the figures, it is proportionately lower to NVIDIA cards. That's a fact. And most of our farm, BBT Todd's and I's farm, is almost all AMD, right? It's all RX 470. Most of them are 8 gig, thank God. There is a handful of 4 gig we have, and RX 570 and 580s, right? So most of the farm is that. We've been retooling to Navi, and then some on the GTX side. But in that testing that I've done, what I did with you guys, and I'm going to take you back through 093, you can get a pretty decent rate for it. You're not going to get the same rate as NVIDIA for sure, but your NVIDIA cards are more money. So it's not as far of a gap as you would think with the right configuration stuff. And you guys probably hear the bird right now. My kids are coming home now, so you guys are getting to hear all that fun. So you believe Ben's compromise that GPU miners could get the desired outcome and discouraging ASICs deploying through Lighthash without having to actually deploy? Yes, so Huck's a table. I think what you're saying is the concept of what I was saying when I say a poison pill, meaning if you've implemented a function within Ethereum that you can exercise at some later time, you've essentially created a poison pill situation, meaning if anybody was going to create new and fabricate new ASICs, they have to take that new concept in their calculations. It's a variable of risk that says, if I go build this and I'm public about it, there's a chance that this network could trigger this event. So now you have this poison pill in place. For the long time, this is the reason why the Ethereum Ice Age event in 2015, when it was explained, was saying that by 2017 we're going to be proof of stake, and we have a mechanism to create an overhead on the network that is going to make it very cost intensive for miners to continue. We're going to raise essentially the difficulty that is not proportionate to the hash power that's on the network, thereby reducing your output or reducing your intake of coin. Right? So it was a poison pill that was built into Ethereum. For the longest time, because proof of stake was an event, fabrication was not done to put ASICs on the network, right? Not until, think of the timeline for the ASICs. When Ethereum really started having its meteoric rise after August of 2017, everything started lifting, ASICs were announced, right? There was probably tooling and benchmarking and concept drawing back when Ethereum first hit $20, right? The very first time in early 2016. But when you look at the timeline of when they were able to go to press and then able to get it printed out and stamped out, there's financial incentives for somebody to build specialized hardware at that point in time. But it was predicated on that go decision was after, when the moment they announced it, which meant they didn't build it yet, they may have fabricated a few of them, when there was scrutiny on changing the algorithm, that was their go-ahead, right? They're like, oh, screw it, these guys ain't going to do anything. Let's build it. Let's make money, right? So by implementing it turned off creates a poison pill for at least fabrication and stamping. It creates another variable of risk for anybody that's going to take that endeavor. That does not occur with FPGAs. If you buy an FPGA, you're buying it with the ability to program it and do whatever you want with it. If you have the talent or you have access to talent that can build the bit stream for it, it is what it is. Part of the exploitation of this bug and issue within ethash can be exploited. It probably is being exploited right now, but it's being kept behaviorally to a certain selected few, right? Otherwise, we just see it just surpass the use of GPUs right now. And it may continue to curtail that behavior. But the second that gets out into the wild and more FPGAs can spin up, you have the financial incentive to do that if you own an FPGA, and then you can still exercise prog proof of work. Let's see here. AMD are a lot cheaper. I saw Gunnis saying AMD are a lot cheaper than NVIDIA, so break-even time could be the same. Yeah, so in anytime you're buying or building a mining rig, it isn't just about your current output. I mean, that's a very important factor. But your CapEx, which is your capital expenditure, your hardware, the thing that you're putting sunk cost into, is a total calculation. That's fixed usually. You're going to pay X amount for the entire operation here. You're going to pay that as a one-time cost. Hopefully you're not financing it and paying interest on that. But you buy that, that's a fixed cost. Proportionally to hash power versus AMD versus its output on ProgPoW versus its discrepancy on NVIDIA, the price premium to NVIDIA proportionally is usually higher than what your output and your OpEx cost for your AMDs if you down power the cards. What we found in that testing, if you go back and look at the testing that I've done, and you'll see more testing that I'll be doing with 0.93, is that you can get the power starved out of ProgPoW. I'm actually encouraging you to take that power down. And the amount of hash power you drop isn't all that much, right? You're looking at about a 10 to 12% drop in total output of hash power and almost a 40% drop in power when you're talking an AMD from an AMD GPU, where we were at like 7 to 9 mega hash on a RX 580 versus maybe 12 mega hash on a GTX 1070. You could get the 580 down to near GTX 1070 power because they're both tilting up to go full tilt on the amount to get those higher hash rates. You can back that AMD down to where now it's only doing 7 versus 9 mega hash, but you're down 40% on the power. So you're around the same power output at, you know, maybe a 20% disadvantage from a hash rate, but you can buy the 580 for 70 to 80 bucks, where the 1070 still might cost you 120, 150 dollars. So it is a math problem. It's a spreadsheet exercise, and you should take some level of effort to understand those numbers when you're doing it. So it's not a complete sad story, ProgPoW for AMD. It really comes down into, if you're buying especially new stuff, where do you buy those purchases at? Hash power is the most important part. Your efficiency for your hash power is your most important part in mining. So because you have a cost to your operations expense, you're going to use more power. Like this GTX 1070 rig, you can't see it right now. I think you can see it right here. This GTX 1070 rig right now is full tilt, 7 cards, and I'm using 520 watts of power on what, 7 cards. So this is what, 7 cards. 7 cards, and I'm using 514 watts of power. If I let this thing go full tilt, it'd be around 850, 900 watts of power. But the optimization for this is where it's at, right? And these get about 20, almost 20 mega hash, around 18 mega hash on RVN or those. I think I got to remember. I think I'm on ZEC or no, I'm on ZEL right now. Zelcoin. I think that's what I'm on this one. I don't remember. I gotta look. But I'm at 515. That's about the right power rating for this kind of setup, as an example. Let me make sure I'm not missing any questions. More importantly, do they have the day set for ProgPoW after June? So the original anticipation, if they were hard forking, was going to be 3 weeks after the June hard fork. So now this proposal, after the next dev call, hopefully they bring it up as part of the proposal. I'll be reaching out to Hudson and the other folks that are part of that and to figure out if we can enact this proposal, what are the entrance criteria to make that proposal active, and what's the exit criteria to make sure that when is it going to be implemented? Or when is it going to be in the clients and on mainnet? Or are they going to try to keep it just on testnet? There's some discussion there. If the intention, it has more weight if it's sitting dormant on mainnet, no question. If it's sitting with the understanding of the action, if this happens, this occurs, there is still weight there that if it's on, the main testnet and it's active there and it's to where they can just activate through a quick hard fork to bring it over to mainnet. I personally will push heavily for it to be on mainnet and set there and then answer some of their concerns that I've seen when it comes to, well, then the miners could just activate it It doesn't really work that way. It works that way mechanically. It does not work that way in the ecosystem, I would argue, when it comes to GPU mining. Most GPU mining is spread out across multiple pools. The pool operators, Ethermine, 2Miners, Ethmine, I mean, there's a huge amount of different pools out there. HiveOS has their own. The pool operators are the ones that are going to be flagging that, right? So if they can get a pretty large conglomerate of the pool operators where all the individual mining hash power is going to agree that they would not forcibly activate Prog proof of work, I think they have a higher confidence. This isn't like Bitmain that has huge amounts of hash power or 4 or 5 people in Bitcoin. This is the entire freaking point that they're missing. That the community has in their mind that miners act like Bitcoin miners, where there's huge factions that have huge amounts of power across large swaths of Bitcoin across that ecosystem. Individual spread out miners work up to pools. Pools then really are the arbiters of that kind of a bad decision, right? Which then we could quickly repoint our hash power and starve them of any opportunity to make a bad decision, if that makes sense. So the pool operators are a proxy, and those proxies are who they're talking about would be the risk. That if they put it out onto mainnet, that there would be a risk to the ecosystem for just activating it anyways, right? So I don't see the pool operators doing that, and if they were to flag that, the moment that starts to try to activate, you can put a block delay on that. We move our hash power out. That's a few YouTube videos to force project to all of you guys, and across all the different things to say, hey, this wasn't the agreement, right? I believe a person is as good as their word, right? That's all you have as an individual. And your behaviors and actions reflect that. I'm super public on everything that I do from this. And because that I'm so public and because people have access to that, the behaviors that I exhibit and that I do reflect in that. I think the same thing goes for, and it's really hard to establish name. Once you're burned for being stupid or something and making a bad call on something, you have to work really hard to get that out. It's really easy to destroy reputation. I think that if the miners have a collective agreement out there of saying, we're not going to push our hash power to a particular pool to try to automatically activate that, that says something. Now that's not going to, who knows in this world, right? But I just have a firm believing based on this community, being part of this community, that that's just not the way the general home miner and people, and even some of the larger operations are going to take that risk, right? They're not going to take that risk because it goes twofold. Like if somebody tried to activate it, there could be another hard fork to disable it, right? So like, it doesn't make, the game theory doesn't calculate outright, right? The perturbation of running through those numbers doesn't make sense to me. Thereby, I dismiss that argument and would happily debate anybody in the Ethereum community that still believes that. Seth, we should be cautious people who are not as principled as you are. I hear you, man, but I think we also can set the behavior for people. I think people naturally that want to be mischievous, that try to look for all those angles and stuff like that, also know that that's kind of a one and done type of event. The community will burn you hard, and you'll also be shunned from a lot of the activities, right? So I think it's one of those things that and then understanding the poison pill mentality, meaning if this happened, this occurs. If that happens, this occurs. I think it goes one step deep of making sure that that compromise has one other step inside the clause that says, if this stuff activates without hitting those shelling points, we reserve the right to disinclude it on a backup fork. I would be fine with that. Because the whole point of this is to protect the community and allow open participation. If somebody takes that in earnest to make a decision, a centralized decision with a handful of miners and act badly, then it's our job as a community to accept the terms of that service of saying, hey, we can torpedo this just as fast as you're making a bad decision, right? And I think the Ethereum community would be fine with leaning into that. And then we can teach people very quickly that good behavior and good stewardship of a community that works together from stuff can get a lot more done. Why are people talking about rolling back the DAG? Did something change? As far as I think, it's not part of the current proposal. ProgPoW. ProgPoW testing was for 4+ DAG. HashRaptor, yes, I had brought it up as an option to see if it was technically an option to reposition block height to epoch to DAG size as an option, just to roll it out there to see if we could get 2-3 gig cards back on them, or back on an option. It isn't 100%. Technically, there possibly is an opportunity to continue with the same epoch, but have essentially the DAG calculation that calculates that size divided by 10. Twitter's a cesspool, man. You just have to learn how to navigate and block in Twitter. Some baddies play the long game, for sure. I mean, there's enough financial incentive to game every angle on this, for sure. But the ability to react. So yeah, baddies can be bad and have some depth in their game, per se, meaning be ready for a few different angles on things. However, it really prevents like fabrication of certain things. All right, guys, I think I'm going to wrap this one up. Hopefully, you guys share, you guys make other content around it. Any of the stuff that I publish on this, you guys are freely to use on any other of your platforms. So if you're writing articles, you're writing blogs or whatever, any of the published information that comes out of the testing and stuff like that, it's all open source. So I'll wrap this one up with you guys, and then we'll. I'm looking at tomorrow starting going back on Twitch. I've been able to configure some of the stuff with Twitch. I think I'm good to go. So if you guys don't follow me on Twitch, that's a shameless plug to go out there on Twitch and follow me there. That's where a lot of the longer testing and stuff occurs. And then I will do the small bits on YouTube for you guys. All right, I think we're going to wrap it up here. I'll catch you guys tomorrow.